goes back to Brown Brothers Harriman, where he had in effect never really left. Because the Central Intelligence Agency was the brainchild of the people at Brown Brothers Harriman. You know, Robert Lovett, who was one of the senior partners there, is the one who wrote the original memo to Truman recommending that they create a Central Intelligence Agency and that they have a covert operations capacity, which they put in Section 5412 to authorize them to engage in covert operations.
And what was Brown Brothers Harriman was just like a normal law firm at the surface, or what?
No, Brown Brothers Harriman wasn't a law firm. Brown Brothers Harriman was a collective investment company.
Oh, it was an investment company, that's right.
And they had the kind of the richest 25 patrons from the robber barons that were all investors, common investors. And they would come together and decide how they were going to direct their investments together. And what they did, for example, after World War I, this gets a little complicated, but after World War I, in 1918, they had the Versailles Treaty negotiations. It turns out that the Secretary of State under Wilson, back in 1918, was a guy named Robert Lansing. Robert Lansing was the son-in-law of John W. Foster, who was the former Secretary of State back in 1893. He's the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. Those are his nephews. And so what he does is when he supervises setting up the Versailles Treaty, he brings in his two nephews as part of the team that they bring to Versailles. Those are the two guys that drafted the war reparations provisions. Inside the Treaty of Versailles.
But this feels like too big of a triple bank shot or something. Because you also talk about like, it's like the Union Bank was like funding.
There wasn't any doubt about that.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
So but do you think that the Versailles was sort of intentionally, you know, too harsh in a way that like made, you know, like created an auspice for the extremism of Nazism, sort of, you know, crushed Weimar Germany?
No, it started out in a much more prosaic motive. Just because what they did is they said, oh, look, we're imposing the war reparations requirements of Germany through the exercise of the power of the State Department, supervising the Versailles Treaty. And so they have this major debt now that they owe to all the corporations that they had destroyed their property in the aggressive war in World War I, right? And so what they did then is through the power of his office as Secretary of State, Robert Lansing appoints Allen Dulles, who is legal counsel for Brown Brothers Harriman, to be the lawyer for Germany. And he conducts a negotiation pursuant to which those war reparations will be covered by Brown Brothers Harriman. They're going to extend loans to the German government to pay the war reparations, and they're going to take as security for those loans stock in all their major military industries.
That's really crazy.
In 1924, George Herbert Walker leaves Brown Brothers Harriman, sets up the Union Bank of New York, completely capitalized by the guys who were part of Brown Brothers Harriman, all the 25 investors. They capitalized the bank. They set up a foreign subsidiary up in the Netherlands called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce. It's run by Fritz Thyssen. And they finance the construction of the international headquarters of the Third Reich.
So crazy.
And they start funneling money to Hitler to rise up to become the bulwark against Bolshevism in Europe. And so that they wanted Hitler to establish this kind of fascist government, the economic theory of which is you place all the instrumentalities of the government at the disposal of the interests of the private corporations, and they will then help the major corporations. The corporations will prosper. They'll hire more people. It'll stimulate your economy. And people all the way up into the top agreed with that. That's a great idea.
The issues,
like Henry Ford and the guys at Brown Brothers Harriman. They thought that's a good idea to do that, right?
I think Ford had ideological sympathies as well.
That was what they were doing. So that's how. And then when Hitler started coming off the leash. And deciding that he was not only going to become the bulwark, he's going to nationalize everything, he's going to take it all over. And so that ended up getting sort of out of control. They lost control of him.
But it's like, this is like a really interesting narrative that the CIA, they're set up by oligopolistic interests. To be able to set up an economic system that was actually fascist.
that was actually putting the instrumentalities of the government at the disposal of the interests of the corporations, because then the corporations could deploy, for example, sending a military expeditionary force down to Nicaragua, and ousting the democratically elected government, all on behalf of who?
Yeah, sort of Yankee
Yankee
imperialism. There was a book called The Three New Deals, and it was like Hitler, Mussolini, and FDR, and they were all sort of compared. And it was sort of, it just shows how sympathetic the U.S. was to Hitler, just after 33.